Okay. Whew, man, it is loud here right now. We'll see what this sounds like when it goes through the
old
the
machine. I feel like I'm dying.
Feel like you're dying.
I feel like I'm dying. Help.
That's
No, I'll be fine. I'll live. Maybe. We'll see. There may be a lot of that. There may be sounds from both ends.
a lot of sounds from both ends. I gotcha. Well, speaking of mortality,
good segue.
We're going to talk about the Green Knight today.
And
kind of
weirdly enough, it's like
of,
it's one you and I were like talking about before we started the show, and it's taken us this long.
Yeah,
there was like honest to God, there was only like a handful of ones we talked about, but a large number of the ones that we did just taken forever to get to.
Yes. And this is an oldie, certainly the story, but yeah, we're gonna touch a little bit because we've talked a little bit about like folklore and fairy tales and structure a lot already. So we're gonna kind of do a quick overview of that.
We fringed on it a little bit with fantasy as well.
Yeah, and then we'll talk about maybe explore the origins of the tale, culture and its effect the Green Knight has on like modern iterations, but specifically the latest film that came out in 2021.
It sounds about right. Maybe a little bit before that, but not by much. Yeah, that was interesting because they not. I don't know if you want to hold off on the history there, but
we can just dive in. So I'll just give the quick rundown. We are talking about fairy tales, but specifically we're going to try and use Sir Gawain Sir Gawain. I've heard it so many different times, but Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, or Sir Gawain. I've heard that too. I don't quite know the correct pronunciation, but this is
most often I've heard it Gawain, but I don't know how 100% truthful that is.
Yeah, Sir Gawain, Sir Giwi. No, that one I made up. But yes.
No, you didn't. You didn't make that up. That's real.
For the sake of the episode and the sake of your ears and mine, we'll simply refer to it as the Green Knight fairy tale, and that's because we saw this movie and we were like, oh, it's definitely, the tale itself is old. We're talking like
older than time. Kind of old.
Older than time itself. But yes, we're going to focus on that today, and specifically, how like the elements of it. This will be kind of a little bit similar to the Christmas episode we did on the Hallmark movies last year.
Yeah.
That
was a good one. I enjoyed that one. That was one you surprised me with, which doesn't happen too often.
Yeah. No. So yeah, that we talked about like the morphology. That this will be similar. So there'll be a lot of stuff that we've touched on before. So you were about to say something though. I interrupted when you were going into like the history of it compared to the film.
I'm gonna be blanking a lot. I'm just gonna apologize ahead of time. I'm doing my best here.
But all right, I'll give a quick rundown of it here.
Yeah, let's dive in. Fairy tales and folklore are kind of like similar arenas, are they not? They're like
Yeah, I've never quite...
Two of those genres that kind of like Venn diagram one another.
Yeah, I've never quite understood if they're... I would lump them into the same thing. They both have that mythological quality. Again, I think genre too is something that was invented after the fact.
Oh, yeah.
We talked about this before in one of the early episodes.
It's kind of like a analytical side of things.
Yeah. Genre is something that that comes out after something has been made or created, like when it's our way of organizing and bringing order to the world.
I kind of took like folklore as like, some of the stuff that the Coen brothers have done, like Inside Llewyn Davis, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Those kind of fall into like a folklore for me.
Yeah.
Or like a Huck Finn if you want to go back further.
Yeah. I would say they both are interchangeable and certainly have their origins in the same area, and we talk a lot about certain things that come from them. They're very a lot of symbolism in fairy tales and folklore, I would say. Like, these are almost ones that are not... I would say the difference is if you look at certain things like in like mythological stories, these ones are certainly in no way necessarily to be interpreted as have ever even happened before. If that kind of makes sense. These definitely exist in the more fantastic realm than certain things like the story of Troy. I always go back to the Iliad a lot.
Yeah.
there's a lot more historical evidence to that than there is Sleeping Beauty, for example.
Troy was such a huge event, considering like there was a war behind it, you know, like a full scale, like two countries going to town on one another. And like there's thus far, like, was it not Troy, if I'm not mistaken, was destroyed, right?
Yeah. I mean, many times over.
Yeah. So it was like the destruction there is kind of like undeniable to some degree.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say that would be, if I'm like trying to give the differential between, you know, like a fairy tale and something more mythical, I would put that mythology might have a bit more of a historical basis to it.
Yeah.
And a lot of that seems to stem from the classical world or antiquity, those stories. But fairy tales and folklore, I think, seem to come out. Fairy tales, for example, I think seem to have their origins more in, you know, the Middle Ages, the medieval period, even going up into, you know, the early Enlightenment, like the 1600s, the 1700s, you know, things like folklore, a good tale I can think of. When I think folklore, I think of like the Headless Horseman.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Halloween tale. Like more, I would say fairy tales and folklore for me tend to exist later on in the timeline in their origins. Like, I don't know what it is about it. Maybe it's just because I was, you know, the black hole that is Disney.
Yeah.
And all the fairy tales that they introduced to us. You know, there is that sort of medieval, or at least that time period, Middle Ages veneer to a lot of the fairy tales that you see, at least the most popular and well-known ones.
Yeah.
So yeah, when we talk about fairy tales, we know a lot of them. I'll just go through some of the classic elements. You always have that magical element to it. There usually is like a magical creature, a spell.
That storybook atmosphere.
Yes,
kind of
storybook atmosphere. You know, you think like Cinderella. There's the fairy godmother,
Princess Bride.
You have to, exactly. Princess Bride definitely has that fairy tale aspect to it.
And fairy tale and fantasy can kind of like very much overlap. There's a lot of fringe there.
Yeah, very usually well-defined lines between good and evil.
Yeah,
that's always tends
generally
to be
some pretty simple
theme.
Moral messages.
Yeah. A lot of moral lessons that come through it. And a lot of them come out of oral traditions. You know, they have that root in that storytelling that they were shared amongst. Because you got to remember, too, when we're going back in time, the internet did not exist. So people had to occupy their days doing something. They still needed that sense. Just like we need the escape today, they needed it too, but they did not have the abundance of material to turn to that we do. And they certainly didn't have it necessarily at the palm of their hand.
Yeah.
I mean, not everyone could read, or if they could, books weren't readily available. Like you'd be lucky if you had a library, depending on what time of the Middle Ages we're talking here.
Going back to Disney, you know, you have characters like Belle that come out of that exact sentiment.
Mm-hmm. No, 100%. Yeah. And so, like, if you look at a lot of them, this is not easier, but just because we're more familiar with the classic fairy tales, I feel like everyone, you know, knows some of the characters. Peter Pan, that's another one.
Yeah.
If you go through and even if you look at the Disney versions of it, it's a really good way to sort of analyze and break down and see, like, okay, what's working? And if you've never done that, if you've never actually broken down a story before... It's one of those things where, like, it takes a bit, and then when you finally start to get somewhat good at it, I don't know, it's one of those things, some things you can't unsee, bro.
Well, you can't turn it off. And then you make enemies because you can't
it's hard
shut
for me
up.
To turn it off.
I can't ever turn it off, and I make so many people annoyed with me.
No, same here. And I always kind of come back with the wise ass remark, like, God damn it, if I bankrupted myself so I could be able to do this, do you understand?
I'm damn sure going to use it.
I have I paid for the right to be picky. Anyway. Yeah, no, there's that quality. You have a lot of archetypal characters in it. You have the hero, the villain, more simple. Simple might not be the best word, but because I don't want to say that there's not complexity to the stories, but the complexity tends to come out more in the plot or the themes or the moral lessons or the world building in a fairy tale than what you might see in a more traditional, modern, you know, like character-driven novel that you might get today.
We talk about world building quite a bit, but it's like it is kind of like the flavor of world building and the types of things that you build out that kind of go into genre separations and like how those lines divide. It is very interesting how like simple differences can make a world of difference in terms of how you classify things.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and a lot of these stories for the longest time, weren't written down. So that's why I think for us, they could be extremely old. Their origins could be even older than we might truly know. But because they came from that oral tradition, it wasn't until you get into like the 17th and 18th centuries that you start to have these things written down. And that's when you get probably the two famous ones. You have Charles Perrault in France, and you have the Brothers Grimm, probably the more, I think, out of the two in Germany, who began to collect and publish these tales. Perrault did Tales of Mother Goose, published in 1697. I never realized how old that one was.
Yeah, it's going back a ways.
Yeah, and that included things like Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty. The Brothers Grimm had, different like children's and household tales that was first published in 1812. So we're going back to the Napoleonic era. Mm-hmm. Things like Rapunzel you have in the Brothers Grimm.
Napoleon, the original Ty Simpkins, because I always misremember it's kind of weird like the time from like not to go on a whole Napoleon rant, but it is interesting from a time frame standpoint how it's like, oh, that was still going around when Napoleon was on. That doesn't seem to add up. The OG Ty Simpkins, for those in the know. If you know, you know.
If you know. Oh, God. How dare you. But yeah, and I think too, these are things that, we've talked about it, how people love to embellish or exaggerate or change the story, or they forget certain things, or just for the sake of laziness, they'll change something because it's easier to say, stuff like that. I mean, even look at how even words today, like, we shorten words and say it this way, or texting, how emojis have become their own language again.
Yeah.
With it. Something too, well I'll get to that too. I'll get to that. But yeah. And it's just like, it was the same thing. There was that culture. It represented some of the culture where the story originated. And then as it is passed along and you have that cultural diffusion, people begin trading or warring or intermingling with each other. And these tales take on new forms and can spread out to different regions from where they originally came from.
Then, they take on a life further in other cultures.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, 100%. It's that pizza effect. I think I've talked about that before on the show. Like pizza started out in Italy, and then it comes to America, becomes something kind of completely different, and then goes back to where and it just keeps going back and forth and building off of each other. I'm butchering the true definition of that, but that's essentially what it is.
Nice.
When something, like essentially what you said, when something starts somewhere, goes somewhere else, and almost takes on a different life of its own in that other
It's that evolution,
territory.
like almost like that game where you you whisper a story around in a circle, and it's like by the time it gets to the other end, it's how much has it changed.
Yeah, the telephone game. Yeah.
Old school. Love it.
But yeah, no, these, the role of fairy tales, I think it was just, one, they serve like practical purposes. It conveys like moral lessons, but it's also easier to sometimes remember a story than like a specific fact. Like if you wanted to remember something of like, oh, this particular plant is poisonous and this particular plant is not, but they look similar. One easy way to do that is to put it in a story, even if it's just a quick little, one-off fable. Even one day the boastful bird ate this flower and died, and there's something like that. It's a terrible story, but you get what I'm saying, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
There is a practical purpose to all stories, I think, but particularly fairy tales. That is one thing that you'll notice that they have in them. But yeah, and like I said, I think escapism, especially too, if you look back thousands of years ago, the hardships that people would have faced back then, very different from what the majority of us, I think, face today.
Yeah, like the Black Plague.
Yeah, no, 100%. But yeah, we're gonna take a look at the Green Knight, Sir Gawain, however you want to say it.
And it's a very interesting lost story.
Yeah, and this is definitely one that follows what we were just talking about, that it starts out as one thing and a lot of stuff gets added along the way.
Yeah.
And it probably wasn't, when it was first written down, that probably wasn't the original inception of it.
And in the history of it, they like found only one copy of it or something like that because the others had been destroyed over the years in various church fires and all kinds of craziness.
The original text, or at least the preserved manuscript that we have, is known. I didn't know this, is known as the Cotton Nero AX or something.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but it's housed in the British Library. And it's written in Middle English, so Middle English, think like Chaucer's Canterbury Tales.
Yeah.
So it's not quite the same. You could probably you'll be able to get some of it. Some of it'll, like when you see like the ye old shop, when you see like shop spelled SHOPPEE or whatever, that's when we're talking like Middle English kind of.
A lot of those kinds of things.
So if you were to read it in actual Middle English, you would be able to get some of it. I don't know if you'd be able to get all of it, but you would certainly see a difference between that and modern English by 100%.
I would certainly miss a ton trying to read old like Middle English. It's a lot of whimsical nonsense at face value.
I mean, if you look at Old English, like if you look at like Beowulf,
that's physically impossible.
That almost looks like German sometimes.
Yeah.
So the tale, classic Arthurian legend, which I think is something that kind of always gets lost. This is kind of revolves around Arthur and his knights, which is again another thing, although that certainly has some historical background. So I'm kind of undermining my earlier argument here.
Well, it's a piece of mythology for sure, because it has deepened into so many cultures at this point that it's mythical.
Yeah, I mean, we look at the idea of a sword and a stone, or like the king returning to claim the throne, or the lost king of a country. So yeah, it's this legend that comes from, at least the earliest known one, it would have been from the 14th century, and that is the manuscript that we were talking about. And they don't even know its origins. The author is anonymous, and I guess this is just what they often refer to the person as, the Pearl Poet, which I did not know. That is new to me. I've never heard that before.
Yeah, I've not heard that either, actually.
And I think it apparently, just from just the quick little research that I did, it's named after another work found in the same manuscript, just called Pearl. I guess that could be another story. I didn't go too deep into that one.
So Pearl of the X trilogy.
Pearl of the X trilogy.
Or Pearl from SpongeBob.
Or Pearl from SpongeBob, yes. So, yeah. So when you look at, I'll give a quick rundown here, the Green Knight, the story. Simply put, you've got Arthur and his knights. I believe it's like New Year's or New Year's Eve in Camelot. And they're having kind of like a celebration, if you will. And just out of nowhere comes this Green Knight. Literally, there's a lot of open to interpretation too in stories like this. But I believe the original thing describes him as literally having like either like a green glow or like green skin.
Yeah.
And kind of being like big and lumbery, kind of almost. I always pictured him almost like Viking-like in my head when I would.
Which is kind of the take that the film took, was a little bit like along those lines. Obviously more mythical than that, but definitely like a formidable physical warrior.
Yeah, and he essentially enters and says, who would like treat with me in a game, in a challenge. Yeah. And it's a strange challenge because he says, okay, whoever will essentially strike a blow on my head, I will return the blow in a year and a day or something. So our main character, Sir Gawain, the G-man. Ye
old G-man.
Takes up his, with the axe or his sword, and strikes a blow on the Green Knight and beheads him. So it's like, oh, okay, what the hell, the guy's dead, so what was the point? But then to everyone's astonishment, of course, he gets up and puts his head back on to his body. Yeah. And then says 1 year hence, and then you'll have to return the favor. And then it's kind of, then Sir G going through his journey to meet the knight at his chapel, and he has to essentially finish the game that he started. And there's a lot of different scenes that happen in it. There's moments where you even get some of the other characters. Sometimes I've seen in different versions. Sometimes like Morgan Le Fay, who's like a big Arthurian character, shows up. Like this was like a ruse by her. Yeah. Sometimes I think even seen Merlin would show up a few times in different versions. But essentially what this is a test of his chivalry. on the road. He's taken in by like an innkeeper, and the innkeeper says to him, you know, like they make like an agreement of rules, and then the innkeeper essentially ends up being the Green Knight. And because Sir Gawain, Sir G, essentially the big thing is like when he comes to submit to have his head chopped off, his head is not chopped off. It was the fact that he stayed true to his word, you know, and came and treated and didn't like lie or just kind of hit the road, if you will. Because who would, you know, I mean, you look at that from a modern standpoint. It's like, why would you ever agree to a game that's going to behead you? But
at least the way the film presents Gawain, like he's kind of just like floating through, not really taking a ton seriously. It's like he kind of accepts the challenge out of almost boredom, I would say.
Boredom, and two, I think he wants to arrogance. I think there's an arrogance in him because he's much younger than everyone, than the knights. So I think
kind of at that age where you feel like you're invincible, can do no wrong.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, we can get more into the movie now with it because that's what we're here more to talk about. But I like, there are some differences. I think you were going to mention this before, like some of the differences.
Yeah.
With the movie compared to the,
because you knew the story more than I did. So when we got to discussing it prior to this, like I got intrigued by like some of the liberties taken,
which I was totally fine with. I actually kind of enjoyed what they did in it. It sets up the same way. I liked their interpretation of the Green Knight. That might be my only major critique with it.
Yeah.
Just because of what I pictured in my head, and it was different than what I pictured, but that's not a fault. That's me being just
it's just one take on it when there's various tellings.
Yeah. So they made him more out to be they made him out to be more of almost like a walking tree type character in the movie.
A little bit of a Groot type.
Yes. A Groot type, but can talk way more mannerisms. Like a tree man, almost like an Ent too, sort of.
Some Deku tree wisdom going on there too.
Yeah, exactly. And he just kind of shows up here, you know, on New Year's Day, or was it Christmas in the movie? It was definitely winter.
Yes. Yeah, because there's definitely acknowledgement of the winter hardships.
Yeah, and Arthur is there. We have like, you know, the known knights like Lancelot, brave Sir Robin ran away. No,
so not appearing in this film.
So yeah, you have the classic Camelot sort of setup, and in rides the Green Knight and is looking for that challenge. I like too the if we're looking at that scene, I really did like the sound design in this.
Yeah,
not just that scene, but I mean this whole movie.
Well, A24 across the board, they're typically pretty
that's right.
solid.
This was A24. I totally forgot. Okay, go ahead.
No, it's okay. I was just gonna say, like, typically across the board, like A and B, their cinematography and their sound design are typically reliably pretty damn solid.
Yeah. Oh, I would 100% agree. Yeah. They definitely, I think, for taking the story in a more cinematic way, I thought they did a good job of adding and changing where they could.
Yeah.
But they kept close to the heart of the moral lesson or the theme with it. But yeah, you have the Green Knight offers the challenge to anyone, and Gawain, who is, again, like I said, played by, is it Dev Patel? Is that his name?
I believe so, yeah. He gets mixed up often with the kid who was in Hereditary.
Yeah.
Even though they're like wildly different ages.
Oh, and he plays a great role in this.
Yeah.
I got to give it, the acting is
Dev Patel, who
this.
just had his recent directorial debut with Monkey Man, which was fantastic.
Oh, all right. Right on.
Yeah, did a great job.
But yeah, he challenges him to strike anyone with his axe on the condition that he receives a return blow in a year and a day. And this is meant to be like, this is a bravery test, an integrity test. And this certainly, the one thing that they did do absolutely well is the stories like this, particularly The Green Knight, is filled with symbolism, like I mentioned, in the themes and the moral lessons. So you don't lose that in the movie. Like, they definitely kept it. How they show it to you is more, I think, to a modern audience taste. which is rightfully so. I think you would have to do that.
Yeah, I don't see how else you do it and really get that appeal.
I mean, because at the end of the day, you got to make some money back.
Got to make that money. Got to make the green, as it were.
Got to make the green. But yeah, no. But looking at the Green Knight, here's this figure who kind of represents the natural world, but also like a supernatural force. It's kind of that unknown, and he's come to challenge, to test Arthur and his knights, and like are you a man of your word? Do you practice what you preach?
Well, as with like a lot of things circling this kind of mythology, it's like honor is a huge part of it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That you have the themes of chivalry in here. I mean, we're talking the Middle Ages, and Arthur, of course, it's going to be there. It's that question of knighthood. Especially you look at the real history of knights. I mean, Europe, people were just killing each other left and right. I mean, there was a lot of violence, and people were warring with each other constantly.
Which is why I think honor was held in such high regard in these storytellings.
Yeah, and this was sort of a way to like sort of restore some order and to society. And these knights who just needed something to do. It was like, okay,
kind of the Wild West of its time.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely, 100%. It was. So yeah, the things like chivalry, the code of a true knight. This was a way to sort of lay out. Here's the playbook of trying not to be a complete asshole in the world. So yeah, Sir Gawain decides he's like, all right, I'll do it. And again, in the movie, he has more of a
devil may care kind of attitude.
Yeah. Like I said, that arrogance about him, that youthfulness, and he takes the axe, chops off his head, and the Green Knight picks it up. I don't think he puts it back on in the movie. I think he's
not right away. It's like when you see him later, he's put back together, I believe.
Yeah. And he kind of just runs out with it. We talked about too, like when the Headless Horseman. I mean,
yeah.
You look at this. I mean, clear parallels to each other.
No, that's a very good point. I hadn't really considered that before, but you're absolutely right.
So again, you can see that theme of just things building and evolving off of previous tales and stories that were introduced. So there comes the thing of, okay, it's a year. I think we just flash forward for the year. Now he has to journey to the Green Knight's chapel to receive his blow to the head. And of course, obviously he's going to die if he does that. So that's kind of where we take like a big look at his character. I would say this one definitely, the internal struggle of Gawain is much more on display in the movie than in the actual narrative.
Yeah.
Yeah, one scene I particularly like about this movie is he's essentially runs into some bandits on the road on his journey to go to the Green Knight's chapel to fulfill his word. And the bandits, I believe, like they essentially rob him. And the way, do you remember this? The scene where like the camera kind of does like a 360 pan around. And like they play a lot with like real or like what ifs. There's a lot of what ifs.
I would agree with that. With
movie, like he's like on the ground and like he's kind of being assaulted, if I remember correctly. And the camera literally does like a huge 360 pan. He's not being assaulted. I think he's just been like tied to the ground, or he's been shackled. He has been assaulted though. That's technically. But as they're turning the camera around at a very slow 360 pan, like this is like almost to the point where like what like it kind of makes you a little anxious too, the way they did it.
Yeah.
And it reveals it's sort of like a slow passage of time. And then when the camera finally makes that full 360, we come back and there's just the main character's his skeleton. He's rotted away and he's essentially died there. And I remember seeing that and I'm like, wait, what?
Yeah, it's a bit of a jarring what the hell moment.
And then, then they do the same thing. They take the same movement, but if I remember correctly, they do go back the same way that they originally went. So the camera then kind of starts panning the original direction, comes all the way back around, and we see him alive again.
Yeah.
And I think that's like a huge part of the theme to this story you have with his character is that grapple with humanity and death. You have this sort of test of, again, it's that test of honor against to that code that he gave his word that he would treat in this game that the Green Knight provided for him.
And it's like such an interesting like dichotomy of like the character personalities too between Gawain and the Green Knight, because the Green Knight seems like this intruder, terrible force, but he's actually the one acting in the most sound morality, whereas Gawain is the knight who should be upholding honor and is like this position of strength and honor. And he's the one actually acting the most immoral and just kind of not giving a crap. At least, like, obviously, largely specifically to this telling, but I found that difference very, very interesting.
Yeah, and they bring in much more existential questions in the film, and there's more of that. The film definitely has a more episodic look to it, and they have like different, like the scene we just talked about is not in the original poem. Gawain and the Green Knight. There definitely is those supernatural elements in it, but the film definitely ups the supernatural elements than compared to the original story. And you definitely get, having remembered this being A24 now, you definitely get that
the weirdness,
that very surreal, those surreal tones, that atmosphere. It's a very, very, this is one of those ones that kind of lot is left open to interpretation.
And in such a beautiful way too, that it's kind of like a feast for the imagination in a lot of ways.
No, absolutely. Yes. And it's not too, what I like about it is it's not the stakes are high, but it's not those, when you look a lot in like fairy tales or modern fantasy, I'd say especially now, there's always got to be that war. That always seems to be a cliche. It's becoming a cliche for me. There's always like this bigger war going on, or like war's coming. Or
the imminence of
big,
of a
existential
threat.
Crisis about to attack the kingdom or whatever.
Yeah.
And a lot of that comes from Lord of the Rings because of that being the more modern fantasy that we, like, a lot of things play off of now.
Yeah.
So everyone thinks, I got to have a war because Lord of the Rings had one.
There's a war going on. Sorry.
There's
two wars.
But yeah, I think what I like about this story is this is an internal journey. This is a journey into self. This is even like a coming of age story a little bit in the sense of how they did it.
In a sense of him maturing, because he is he is a decently well-aged man of certain level of status, but at the same time, it's like his internal maturity hasn't quite gotten there yet.
His wisdom, he doesn't have that wisdom yet when you compare him to King Arthur.
Yeah.
He is certainly much younger.
Which makes it a more interesting coming of age story for me.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it definitely has that quality to it. But yeah, this one definitely focuses more on the personal growth of the character. This is a character journey. There's obviously it's the Middle Ages, so there's wars going on all the time. But in terms of this plot, we're not worried about some big, quest. There's the epicness of it, I guess, even though it is epic and rich in how it's shot and how it's done. That just the scope, if you will, I think is the word I'm looking for. The scope of it is much more toned down, much more quaint.
I think in terms of A24's slate of films that they have from recent history, I think this is one of the more underrated ones, personally.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think one of the reasons it just doesn't get, critically, I think it's like in the 90 percentile, if I remember, in Rotten Tomatoes. But I think commercially, it's probably not as high up. But I think it's just one of those ones that it definitely challenges you on what's going on. And like I said, it has that episodic take to it. This is definitely one like you can sort of it has those sort of break points in it. It's another one structurally, like I said, with the fairy tales, how you can go through and look and they're pretty good to analyze in terms of the structure to it. And this one has the same thing because the location, if you look at the locations, they change. Like you get the castle in the beginning, you've got the meadow or the glen, then you've got the innkeeper scene. They did keep that. And we have, what's the actor's name? He also plays the Green Knight.
Yeah, I know who you mean. I can never remember that dude's name, and he's in so many things.
Joel Edgerton. Yeah.
That's it. Couldn't think of it.
He plays the Green Knight and also the innkeeper.
He's done so many cool things. Like he was in Chernobyl. He was in The Witch. His voice is entrancing.
Yeah. He's one of those ones where like you see him and you're like, I've seen that guy before.
Yeah. It's when I hear his voice more so, like he has a very iconic face, but like his voice like cuts through and I'm like, oh, there he is.
Yeah, exactly. But a lot of this too, what I like about the film is it does, like I said, brings with Gawain honoring his word. And he does have that scene where he talks to King Arthur, saying like, what do I do? And Arthur says you should honor your word. And I believe, does he give him his sword? I don't remember on that. Don't quote me on that one. But I think he gets Excalibur maybe for a second.
Yeah, I don't recall.
But anyway.
Yeah.
So, oh my God, I totally forgot a huge part of the story.
Ahead.
I'm so
sorry. Go
sorry.
for it. You're good.
Before he leaves to go on to the chapel, he takes along with him with the green axe. I'm sorry. Yes, he takes the green axe with him.
Yes. Yeah.
And
that is a big
he
part.
is given a green girdle by his mother. And she says that as long as he wears it, no harm shall come to him. And that's like that symbol of it. And that is in the girdle is in the original story.
Yeah.
This is kind of huge, I think, because I had to bring that up because otherwise it wouldn't make sense at the ending. So he goes off on his journey. He crosses. I forgot to mention too. I think one of the first things is he crosses a battlefield, littered with dead warriors. Again, we have that reminder, that physical reminder of that he could be going to his death.
Yeah.
But it's the question of you gave your word. So there's that thing of honor again. And, what is there something beyond, your personal wants? Obviously we don't. We want to survive. We don't want to be killed or die.
Yeah.
But is surviving worth the tarnishing of your soul, essentially, is what I take sometimes from what he's kind of grappling with as he goes forward in the story.
Well, it's because of the morality of a lot of the choices that he makes, too, because they are often questionable.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's where, when he's after that battlefield, that's where he meets one of Alicia Vikander's characters. And that's where he gets kind of upended and tricked. And he's tied up. And that's where we have the whole sequence of the hallucination of his death. So anyway, but there's a lot of, like, throughout the film, there's a lot of that, facing death, facing getting older.
Yeah.
Facing the struggles of life. That's why I do consider this a somewhat of a coming of age of Bill Douglasman. Is that the term?
Well, it's an interesting way to look at it because, like we said before, it's like, yeah, he is an of age knight, and he is, in many ways an adult, but it's like that maturation, that sensibility of being an adult. Like, so it's like it's a different kind of coming of age story, which makes it interesting.
Yeah. Then there's the scene. This is a cool scene. I forgot about this one. After he's been stricken off the road. At nightfall, he arrives at an abandoned cottage. This is the scene they made up for the movie. And he's awakened by a young woman named Winifred, who asks him to retrieve something that she had lost from a nearby spring. And again, he asks what will he receive in return. I don't think she gives him a reply, but she asks him to find her skull. And then he realizes that he's talking to a ghost. And I think he says too, he asks her like if she is a spirit or a person. And this is a cool thing. This is integral to the core of the story. Is she a spirit or a person? To which she asks, is there a difference? What does it matter? What's the difference between the two?
Yeah. It's the fact that he wouldn't that makes it irrelevant.
Yeah. But he does retrieve her skull and reunites it with her remains. And there's a lot, like I said, there's a lot of that going on. You have to this does kind of remind me too a little bit. And again, it's Arthurian. It does remind me a little bit of the quality of Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
Oh, yes.
How you just had those structurally. I mean, how you have those sketches that they would do,
especially like the first time we watched this, I believe we both watched it together for the first time.
Yeah.
And I couldn't help but keep thinking of Monty Python, like Holy Grail, whenever we were watching it. Mm-hmm. So it does kind of evoke that quality.
Yeah, no, as it should. The Monty Python movie, even though they're doing it, even though it's a comedy, it still follows that same rhythm.
Yeah.
And you have the coconut sequence in the opening. You have
which is hilarious because the whole point of that was because they were too cheap to buy horses.
No, exactly. Yeah, you have the Black Knight sequence. Like it has that episodic quality.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm kind of rambling on here, but
which is fine.
One of the big things I do want to talk about is if we get to the ending. So spoilers.
Spoiler alert.
But you have Gawain finally reaches the Green Chapel, and I'm skipping over a lot, so I'd highly recommend watching the movie.
Yeah, it is very good.
And it is, I did look it up, it is Christmas that in the movie.
I suspected that it was. It made sense that it was.
But Christmas, I think in the original poem it's New Year's, but it's definitely around that same time, end of the year, going into the new year. And then the Green Knight awakens finally, and I did like how they had him. He's kind of like stuck in the recess of the chapel. I used to know the name for it, what they call it. There's an actual term for it, but anyway.
Yeah. And
he just kind of walks out. Again, the sound design of like, almost like a tree falling over.
Yeah.
When he comes out, and he says, "All right, are you ready for, to like finish the game?" And this is where they took it a little bit differently, which I really liked. And tell me what you think. The Green Knight swings, Gawain flinches, and he goes to kneel again, but at the last moment he scrambles away. He just leaves.
Yeah.
He can't do it, and he takes off. And they kind of give us now like another alternate version, another episode of this is him. In the future, he becomes king. He has a son, and essentially you get almost like almost like a Shakespearean quality here in a little bit of like how he becomes sort of a tyrant.
Yeah, that was the vibe that I got as well.
Yeah, and his castle gets placed under siege. We don't know who's doing this exactly, but his family that he has slowly leaves him. And when the enemy starts to come in to get him, there's almost like a Macbeth kind of thing going on. And what's happening is death finally comes for him then. This again turns out to be a vision or hallucination to him, similar to that sequence when we were doing the whole 360 pan, or similar to, I don't even know if I would want to call it a hallucination, because I feel like that makes it seem like it didn't happen. Almost more of it's
kind of like a multiversal vision kind of thing.
Yeah, a spiritual moment. He a supernatural moment that is happening to him. He gets to see what the alternative might be, and he's brought back. Then we kind of swing right back. Finally, he's there again, kneeling in front of the Green Knight, and realize it was that's the other choice. He could run away.
Yeah.
And then finally, I know I've kind of like lost in the details here, but this is a crucial thing. The green girdle, which he's carried with him the entire journey, and it always turns up throughout different scenes. It's always kind of there.
Definitely prevalent.
He finally, for the first time, removes it and tells the knight that he is ready. And you can see it in his eyes. He kind of willingly says, "All right, nope, go ahead." And the Green Knight kind of praises him for his bravery. And then this is where they kind of leave it up to you. But I always took it as like, he kind of like, how do I put it? Like, not like taps him on the head, but gives him like a, like kind of one of those embracing like touches, like, you might give like a child or something. And he playfully states with him, "Now, off with your head." And then it just completely cuts to there. And that's how
I took it as a Tony Soprano ending.
Oh, you took it? You really did?
Yeah, that's how it landed for me.
Yeah. See, I took it as that he conquered his wants, his desires, his fear of death. When you look at just how, I don't know, just the way the Green Knight smiles at him, I take it as die now, die later. You are mortal, and remember that.
Yeah.
And I think he kind of accepted, like he gained some wisdom.
It is one that I do believe is, like you said, is very open to interpretation, has a lot of different potential meanings. And that's my favorite kind of clinching ending. Prisoners, a lot of other things.
Yeah, and absolutely. The one thing about a fairy tale is you can interpret it, take the symbolism as how you want for it. And it is entertaining.
You have the potential to look at it from multiple angles and get multiple things out of it.
Yeah, no, 100%. But yeah, and having like, this more ambiguous approach to the ending, I think it certainly brings the theme way more into the fold for the audience, and it really forces you to kind of reflect. Like I said, this is that inward journey, and I love the fact that this isn't an original story. Yeah, obviously, and it's old. It's they were adapting it from something else. But like I said, I like you don't always have to have in fairy tales or fantasy or science. There doesn't always have to be that big battle or great war that's going on. Something else can be happening.
It can be an internal war.
Yeah, you can tell a more intimate story in it, and it'll still be just as good.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
But yeah, no, I highly recommend. I've been talking nonstop, but like, give me like, I mean, would you recommend The Green Knight? I mean, I know it's
absolutely. It was one that
different.
I kind of found, you know, because I was at the time I was following A24 pretty closely, and I was like, whoa, what is this little gem here that they're putting out?
Mm-hmm.
I saw the trailer for it, and I was like, I got to check this out, and it delivered. I was very much impressed with it.
Yeah,
and, you know, it's one that's kind of stuck with me through the years.
But you have to do it. Doesn't do it. It invites you to do some of the work with it, though.
Absolutely, which was part of the greatness of it.
Yeah, and like I said, the setup is very easy. Like it's the structure of it is simple, but the themes, the subtext, the meanings, the morals, the ambiguity of it is what's, you know, where they're building the complexity with.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you have not, I highly recommend The Green Knight, the 2021. I don't know, there could be older versions that were filmed before.
I believe this was one of the first, actually, because, you know, the story was lost to the ages there, so it was uncovered and found. That's why this was so interesting to me personally, because how often do you see something that hasn't been adapted that many times, you know?
Yeah, true. Absolutely. But yeah, no, definitely put this on the radar. Give it a watch sometime.
It's a good one.
It's one of those things where like it takes a bit, and then when you finally start to get somewhat good at it, I don't know, it's one of those things, some things you can't unsee, bro.